All right, here we go. During the 2019 college football season, the Minnesota Gophers had two dope wide receivers, number 13 and number 6, Tyler Johnson and Rashod Bateman. And both of those receivers put up monster numbers that year for Minnesota. But if we watch the film, just turn on the tape, and I ask you the question, which player looks like the better NFL prospect? I venture to say that 9 out of 10 times, people would have said number 13. And yes, we're talking about Baltimore Ravens second-year wide receiver Rashod Bateman, a.k.a. Shotty B. The Ravens have shown a ton of confidence in this young second-year player this offseason, shipping away Marquise Hollywood Brown to Arizona. Should we, as Dynasty gamers, be as enthusiastic about this second-year wide receiver's potential to break out for us in fantasy football? Let's dive in right now. What's going down, everybody? It's your boy RayG here from the Draft Network, and yes, we are going to talk a little Rashod Bateman, the Baltimore Ravens second-year wide receiver. A lot of faith and confidence has been shown in this young man from the Baltimore Ravens organization. They shipped off a player who was 9th in the NFL in targets last year, top 15 in target share, top 15 in air yards. Hollywood Brown, paired with Kyler Murray in Arizona. The wide receiver one share is all Rashod Bateman. Right now, he's coming off the board as wide receiver 22 in Dynasty, one spot behind Jerry Jeudy, but one spot ahead of his old running mate, Marquise Brown. Should you be drafting him to be your wide receiver 1, or is he appropriately placed as a back-end wide receiver 2 for Dynasty purposes? Is this a player we can build around? Is he a cornerstone type asset for us in Dynasty fantasy football? While we would love to have the next Jamar Chase, the next Justin Jefferson, man, those dudes are outliers. We cannot expect and anticipate every wide receiver to enter the NFL to become what these guys have done. It's just historically on a different level. When you look at what he did last year, 65 targets, double that. He's definitely going over 65 targets this year, 46 receptions, 515 yards, and 1 touchdown. He played 82% of his snaps out wide. Beautiful. He's the X. We love it. And 18% of his snaps from the slot. Now, we know Baltimore's probably going to be a consolidated passing attack. What I mean by that, the one is really Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is the one, and the offense will probably flow in out through Mark Andrews outside of Rashod Bateman. But listen, Baltimore really doesn't have anybody else to throw to. Are we going to depend in a lineup league on Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace? I don't think so. The only pass catchers that I have any interest in from this Baltimore offense in a lineup league is Rashod Bateman and Mark Andrews. And, it's really important when we're talking about wide receivers to see how successful they were versus different coverages and how successful they were with their route inventory. Can they run a complete route tree? And damn it, can they get open when they're running these routes? And thanks to Matt Harmon's reception perception, we have visual aid to sort of illustrate how successful these players were versus different coverages and inside different routes. And Rashod Bateman, very, very good data behind where he was successful at last year. Versus man coverage, 56.5% of his routes came against man coverage. He succeeded 72.7% of the time, good for 74th percentile. Pretty nice for the rookie, right? Zone coverage, of all of the routes that he ran, 43.5% of his routes came against zone, and he succeeded in 83.1% of those routes, which is good for 85th percentile. And then finally, when the corner's up in your face and they're about to jam press you, can you defeat press coverage? Rashod Bateman said, I ain't got no problem with that. 81st percentile, because when they try to press me, 76.5% of the time, I'm getting off of that and I'm getting open. You look at his route inventory. What I love about Bateman is his ability to go deep, right? He's not Hollywood Brown, but he's an above average athlete that's got the speed to push vertically down the field, but he also has no problem running in over the middle of the defense. Slants, 24% of his routes, dig routes, 13% of his routes, and he had success on those slant routes 84% of the time, on those digs 70% of the time, curl routes 92% success rate, out routes 84% success rate. This is what I want to see from Rashod Bateman. The ability to go deep, to go over the middle of the field, and to get open on those critical moments where Lamar Jackson's got to have that out. It's going to Mark Andrews or it's going to Rashod Bateman. So based on what he did during his rookie season, what can we predict? What can we expect from this second-year wide receiver moving forward? And for that, we turn to my man, Jordan Backus. Now, JB runs the analytics over at Destination Devy, and he put together an awesome decision tree model that helps predict project wide receiver success based on what they did in year 1 and year 2, dating back from 2017 to 2019. So even though Rashod Bateman did not have huge counting stats during his rookie season, he did score higher than a very critical number, which is 5.7 points per game for rookie wide receivers. This is a threshold that we need these rookie wide receivers to hit. If a rookie wide receiver can score over 5.7 fantasy points per game during their rookie season, that just makes what they could become in the future from a historical standpoint, from the sample size that we're looking at, a lot more favorable, right? If they do not achieve 5.7 fantasy points per game, they fall into a bucket where their career outlook looks like about 2.9 fantasy points per game moving forward. The fact that Rashod Bateman did score more than 5.7 fantasy points per game during his rookie season puts him at a floor of about 11 points per game fantasy finish for his career. Now, I know that doesn't sound great. But when you look at the players inside of those buckets, you'll feel a little bit better. Remember, we talked about this with Michael Pittman. In that tier 1 bucket for Michael Pittman Jr., he's in there with the Cooper Kupps, the A.J. Browns, the DK Metcalfs, the Deebo Samuels. Now, some of the players that went into that second tier bucket in which Rashod Bateman falls into after their rookie season, but they took a jump from rookie year to their second year: Michael Gallup, Deontay Johnson, Courtland Sutton, Kenny Golladay, Corey Davis. And all of those wide receivers had top 3 round draft capital. Some of the players that fit into that tier 2 bucket that did not progress from year 1 to year 2: D.D. Westbrook, Darius Slayton, Anthony Miller, Traquan Smith, MVS. But all of those players had round 4 draft capital or later. So right now, Rashod Bateman, just the mere fact that he scored more than 5.7 fantasy points per game during his rookie season puts him in a very good bucket to have a career floor of about 11 points per game. Now, the grand scheme of things, and here's where I must temper my enthusiasm with objective data, and this is what I love about the fantasy space. I'm going to just say this. The fantasy space can learn a lot from the draft community, but there's some things the draft community can also learn from the fantasy space, because we've done a really good job of identifying metrics and data points to sort of show you want early breakouts, you want young players. These are some of the thresholds. If they don't hit that, their career outlook in fantasy could be a little bleak or could be bullish, but that also can be sort of indicative of how they perform on the NFL field. There's no doubt Rashod Bateman is a good player. I'd venture to say that Rashod Bateman is a damn good player. But when you're looking at wins above replacement, right, I'm really into this warp data. It's really scary when you get from about wide receiver 12, wide receiver 13, and there's not much difference between wide receiver 13 and wide receiver 36. So if you're telling me that Rashod Bateman is only going to be wide receiver 22, wide receiver 18, wide receiver 23 for the remainder of his career, that's a player, while I like to have him on my fantasy rosters, while I want to throw him in a couple of lineups, where I'd feel comfortable throwing him in some lineups, that's not the type of player that I'm going to build around or trade significant capital in order to acquire. Rashod Bateman is an outstanding wide receiver. I think he's fantastic. Do I think he has the potential to jump into that top 10, top 12 category? I'm not sure, but I really would love to hear what you all think Rashod Bateman's outlook for the 2022 season and beyond is. I'm bullish, but I'm tempering those expectations, because right now, based on what we've seen, based on some of the categories that he's hit, some of the thresholds and the buckets he's fallen into, he's looking more like a wide receiver, a mid, maybe high-end wide receiver too. And in Dynasty, in fantasy, those guys, unfortunately, are just very, very replaceable. That doesn't mean he's a bad player. We're just saying you can find players at wide receiver 30 that give you over the course of the season just about what wide receiver 15 gives you in fantasy football. So Rashod Bateman, good player. I want him, not breaking the bank, not building around him in Dynasty, but damn it, I want him on my roster. I appreciate y'all tapping in. We got more content coming. Go to thedraftnetwork.com. Check out all the dope content creators. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button, like, subscribe, comment for the algorithm. Let me know who y'all want me to talk about next time. I'm out of this thing. Peace.